Silence is not weakness. It is a language most people never learn to understand. And the people who rely on control, pressure, and emotional games, they understand it the most. Toxic people don't fear loud people. Loud people are easy to read, easy to trigger, easy to control. What they fear are the ones who say nothing, but slowly change everything. The ones who don't react the way they expect. The ones who don't argue, don't chase, don't explain, and don't give away their emotions for free. If someone has ever tried to control you, manipulate your feelings, or drain your energy until you felt exhausted without even knowing why, then this will feel deeply personal. Because the truth is, their power was never about strength. It was about access. Access to your reactions. Access to your time, access to your emotional space. And once that access starts disappearing, everything shifts. There is a quiet transformation that happens when a person stops playing the game without announcing it. No warning, no confrontation, no final speech, just a series of small, silent changes. And those changes confuse toxic people more than anything else, because they are used to patterns. They study reactions, they depend on predictability, they expect explanations, they expect emotional responses, they expect you to stay the same. But when that pattern breaks without a word, they lose control. Not instantly, but gradually. First comes confusion, then frustration, then distance, and finally, respect or fear. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet kind that makes them think twice before trying the same tactics again. This video is not about becoming cold or distant from everyone. It is not about revenge or proving a point. It is about understanding a deeper kind of strength that most people overlook. A strength that does not need attention. A strength that does not need validation. A strength that does not explain itself, because the less you explain, the less they can twist. The less you react, the less they can feed. The less you chase, the less they can control. And this is where everything changes. There are certain behaviors that look small from the outside, almost invisible. No big gestures, no dramatic moments. But internally, they shift the balance completely. These behaviors remove emotional access without creating conflict. They create distance without announcing it. They build boundaries without asking for permission, and the most interesting part is that toxic people notice these changes faster than anyone else, because they are the ones who feel the loss of control first. They are the ones who sense that something is different, even when nothing is being said, and that silence becomes uncomfortable for them, because silence forces them to face something they cannot control. Most people think the only way to deal with toxic behavior is through confrontation. Speaking up, arguing back, defending every action, explaining every decision, trying to prove something. But that approach often keeps the cycle alive. It feeds the situation. It gives more energy to the very thing you are trying to escape. And slowly, without realizing it, people get pulled deeper into the same pattern. More words, more reactions, more emotional exhaustion, until it becomes normal, until it feels like there is no other way. But there is another way, a quieter way, a more controlled way, one that does not rely on force, but on awareness, one that does not require you to win arguments, but to step out of them completely. And this is where most people struggle. Not because it is complicated, but because it requires discipline. It requires patience. It requires letting go of the need to respond instantly. It requires trusting that not everything needs to be explained. And once this shift begins, the results are not loud. They are subtle, but they are powerful. What you are about to learn in this video are 10 silent behaviors that change how toxic people see you, treat you, and interact with you. These are not quick tricks or temporary tactics. These are long-term shifts in how you carry yourself, how you respond, how you protect your energy without making noise about it. Each behavior builds on the next. Each one removes a layer of control that toxic people rely on, and together they create a version of you that is calm, steady, and difficult to manipulate. Some of these behaviors will feel simple at first, almost too simple, but that is where most people underestimate their impact. Because consistency is what makes them powerful. Doing one of these once will not change much, but repeating them quietly over time changes everything. It changes how people approach you, it changes how much they can influence you, and most importantly, it changes how you feel within yourself. More stable, more in control, less affected by unnecessary drama. There is also something else that is rarely talked about. When you start applying these behaviors, not everyone will react positively at first. Some people may become distant, some may try harder to get a reaction, some may question the change, and that is part of the process. Because when you stop giving people what they are used to, they notice, and their reaction reveals more about them than anything they could say. This is not about pushing people away. It is about allowing the right distance to form naturally, without force, without explanation. By the end of this video, you will understand why silence can be more powerful than words in the right moments. You will see how small behavioral shifts can create strong boundaries without conflict, and you will recognize patterns that once felt confusing but now start to make sense. This is not about becoming someone else. It is about removing what was never serving you in the first place. It is about stepping out of patterns that drain your energy and stepping into a way of living that feels lighter, clearer, and more controlled. And there is a reason to stay until the end, because the last few behaviors are the ones most people avoid. Not because they are difficult, but because they require letting go completely. Letting go of the need for closure, letting go of the need to be understood, letting go of the need to win. And once that happens, something shifts internally that cannot be reversed, a kind of peace that does not depend on anyone else, a kind of clarity that makes decisions easier, a kind of strength that does not need to prove itself. This is not about becoming silent in every situation. It is about choosing when silence becomes your advantage. It is about knowing when to step back instead of stepping in. It is about understanding that not every battle deserves your energy. And once you see this clearly, it becomes easier to move differently, to respond differently, to live differently. So if any part of this feels familiar, if there has been a moment where you felt controlled, drained, or misunderstood without knowing exactly why, then stay with this, because once you start applying these silent behaviors, they lose their power over you. Not all at once, but steadily, quietly, and permanently. Welcome to the channel. If this kind of content speaks to you, make sure to subscribe and stay connected. Noise feels powerful, but it often works against you. The natural instinct is to respond fast, explain everything clearly, and prove your point step by step. It feels logical, it feels fair, it feels like the right thing to do. But in situations with toxic people, this approach quietly keeps you trapped in the same loop. You don't win against toxic people by arguing. Arguments give them exactly what they want, which is your attention, your energy, and your emotional involvement. Every word you add becomes material they can twist, redirect, or use to pull you deeper into the situation. You don't win by explaining yourself either. Explanations seem like clarity, but in the wrong environment they become openings. The more you explain, the more angles they find. The more details you provide, the more opportunities they get to challenge, question, or reshape the narrative. And you definitely don't win by proving them wrong. Because for toxic people, being right is not the goal. Control is. And control does not depend on facts. It depends on how much influence they have over your reactions. This is where most people stay stuck without realizing it. They think if they just say it better, explain it more clearly, or defend themselves more strongly, things will finally change. But instead, the cycle repeats. More words, more tension, more confusion. It becomes exhausting. Not because you lack the right points, but because you are playing a game where the rules are constantly shifting. A game where logic is not the main tool and where emotional reactions are the currency. And the more you invest, the more you lose without noticing it immediately. The real shift happens when the approach changes completely. Not louder, not stronger, just different. You win by becoming unreadable. Not silent in a passive way, but controlled in a deliberate way. Unreadable means your reactions are no longer predictable. Your emotions are no longer easily accessed. Your responses are no longer automatic. It creates a gap, and that gap changes everything. Because toxic behavior relies on patterns. It relies on knowing how you will respond before you even do. It relies on pushing certain buttons and getting familiar outcomes. And when those outcomes stop appearing, the entire dynamic begins to break. At first, the change is subtle. You pause instead of reacting. You respond less instead of more. You listen without immediately jumping in, and these small differences start to shift the energy of every interaction. There is less to grab onto, less to challenge, less to control. And that absence creates discomfort on the other side. Not because you are doing something aggressive, but because you are no longer feeding the same pattern. The usual flow gets interrupted. The expected reactions don't arrive. And suddenly, the situation feels different without any clear explanation. This is why becoming unreadable is not about hiding or pretending. It is about removing unnecessary exposure. It is about understanding that not every thought needs to be spoken, not every feeling needs to be shown, and not every situation needs your full emotional presence. When you begin to apply this consistently, something starts to shift internally as well. You feel less pressure to respond instantly, less need to prove your point, less urgency to correct every misunderstanding, and that calm, controlled presence becomes noticeable even without words. Toxic people rely on reactions, quick reactions, emotional reactions, strong reactions, reactions that reveal what matters to you and how deeply it affects you. Because once they see that, they know where to focus, they know what to push, they know what to repeat. Reactions give them direction. They act like signals that guide their behavior, and when those signals disappear or become inconsistent, it creates uncertainty. They can no longer predict the outcome, they can no longer rely on the same strategies, and that uncertainty weakens their position more than any argument ever could. They also rely on emotional access, easy access, direct access, the kind of access where they can say something and immediately affect how you feel. When emotional access is open, it becomes easy for them to influence your mood, your decisions, and even your self-perception. But when that access starts to close, even slightly, it creates distance. Not physical distance, but emotional space. And within that space, their words carry less weight. Their actions have less impact. Their presence feels less overwhelming. It becomes harder for them to reach you in the same way. Predictability is another key factor. Knowing how you will respond gives them a sense of control. If they know that a certain comment will trigger a certain reaction, they can repeat it whenever they want that outcome. If they know that silence from them will make you chase, they can use that pattern again and again. Predictability turns interactions into routines, and routines are easy to control, but when you start changing those patterns, even in small ways, predictability fades. Your responses become less expected. Your behavior becomes less easy to map. And without that map, their ability to influence you weakens. The moment you remove these elements, reactions, emotional access, and predictability, something shifts. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. They don't get louder in a powerful way, they get uncomfortable, because they are used to control flowing in a certain direction. And when that flow changes, it creates friction. They may try different approaches, they may test boundaries, they may push in new ways, but the results are not the same. And that difference is what creates discomfort. This discomfort is not always obvious from the outside. It does not always show as direct reactions or clear changes in behavior. Sometimes it appears as hesitation, sometimes as reduced effort, sometimes as subtle distance. Because when the usual strategies stop working, the motivation to continue decreases, not instantly, but gradually. And this gradual shift is what creates space for you. Space to breathe, space to think, space to act without constant pressure. There is also an internal effect that often goes unnoticed at first. As you become less reactive and more controlled, your own emotional state begins to stabilize. Situations that once felt overwhelming start to feel manageable. Words that once triggered strong reactions start to lose their impact. And this change is not because the external situation has improved immediately, but because your internal response has shifted. You are no longer giving the same level of access. You are no longer participating in the same way. And that creates a sense of control that feels different from trying to win an argument. Over time, this approach builds a new pattern. A pattern where your presence is calm, your responses are measured, and your energy is protected. It becomes clear that not everything deserves your reaction. Not everything requires your explanation. Not everything needs to be corrected. And this clarity simplifies interactions. It removes unnecessary layers, it reduces noise, and it allows you to focus on what actually matters. At the same time, it changes how others approach you. Not just toxic people, but everyone. When you are not constantly reacting, not constantly explaining, and not constantly proving yourself, your presence feels different, more grounded, more stable, less influenced by external pressure. And this shift naturally creates a level of respect that does not come from force but from consistency. Because people start to see that your behavior does not change based on every situation. It remains steady. For toxic individuals, this steadiness is difficult to work with. It does not give them clear entry points. It does not offer easy reactions. It does not provide emotional leverage. And without these elements, their usual methods lose effectiveness. They may try to adapt, they may attempt new approaches, but without the same level of access, the impact is reduced, and this reduction, repeated over time, changes the dynamic completely. It is important to understand that this is not about controlling them, it is about controlling your own responses. It is about deciding what you give and what you keep. It is about recognizing that your reactions are valuable and should not be given freely in every situation. And when you treat them that way, others start to adjust accordingly. Not because you demanded it, but because the environment has changed. As this shift continues, interactions become simpler, less intense, less draining. You spend less time thinking about what to say next, less time replaying conversations, less time trying to fix or prove something. And that mental space allows you to focus on your own direction, your own growth, your own stability. It becomes easier to move forward without carrying unnecessary weight from every interaction. This approach does not remove challenges completely. There will still be moments where reactions feel natural, where explanations feel necessary, where proving a point feels important. But the difference is awareness. You begin to see the patterns clearly. You begin to recognize when engagement adds value and when it only continues a cycle. And with that awareness, your choices become more intentional. You start choosing silence not out of weakness but out of understanding. You start choosing calm responses not out of fear but out of control. You start choosing distance not out of avoidance but out of clarity. And these choices, repeated over time, create a version of you that is less affected by external behavior and more guided by internal stability. As this builds, the dynamic shifts further. The same words that once created strong reactions now pass without impact. The same situations that once felt intense now feel manageable. And the same people who once had a strong influence now feel less significant in your emotional space. Not because they changed first, but because your approach changed. And within this shift, a new level of confidence begins to form. Quiet confidence, the kind that does not need to be shown or proven. The kind that comes from knowing that you are not easily pulled into patterns that drain you. That you can choose your responses. That you can protect your energy without conflict. And that you can step back without needing to explain why. This is where the real change begins. Not in what you say, but in what you stop saying. Not in what you do, but in what you stop doing. And these silent adjustments carry more impact than any loud reaction ever could, because they change the structure of the interaction itself. They remove the foundation that toxic behavior relies on. And without that foundation, the entire dynamic becomes unstable. From this point, the focus shifts from reacting to observing, from explaining to understanding, from proving to choosing. And this shift opens the door to a different way of handling situations. A way that is less about winning and more about maintaining control over your own space. A way that is less about external outcomes and more about internal stability. And as this continues, the results become more visible. Less tension, less confusion, less emotional exhaustion. More clarity, more control, more peace. Not because everything around you has changed, but because your role within it has changed, and that change influences everything else. Here are 10 silent behaviors that quietly make toxic people step back without you saying a word. Control does not always come from force. Most of the time it comes from information, from knowing how you think, how you feel, and how you respond. That is why the first shift is simple but powerful. You stop over-explaining. You stop giving long reasons for every decision. You stop trying to make everything clear to people who already decided how they want to see you. At first, this feels uncomfortable. There is a habit of filling silence with words, of making sure nothing is misunderstood, of correcting every small detail. But over-explaining creates openings. Every extra sentence becomes something that can be questioned, twisted, or used later. When you reduce your words, you reduce their material. When you give less detail, you give less control. Short answers, clear decisions, no extra justification. The less you explain, the less they can twist. This is not about being rude or distant. It is about understanding that not everyone deserves access to your full reasoning. Some people do not want clarity, they want control. and clarity in the wrong hands becomes a tool against you. So you start choosing what to say and what to keep. You begin to notice how powerful a simple response can be, how much calmer things feel when you are not trying to explain everything. And slowly the need to justify every move fades. In its place comes a quiet confidence, a sense that your decisions do not need constant approval or validation. And that alone begins to change how others interact with you. Then comes another shift that looks small but feels completely different. You respond, but you do not react. The difference is timing and control. Reaction is fast, emotional, automatic. It happens without thinking. It gives immediate feedback. Response is slower, calmer, intentional. It creates space between what happens and how you reply. That space is where control lives. When you stop reacting instantly, the entire dynamic changes. The other person expects a quick emotional reply. They expect energy, they expect movement. But instead there is a pause, a delay. A calm answer that does not match the intensity of the moment. This pause is powerful. It breaks the rhythm. It removes the excitement they rely on. And it forces them to sit with their own words. Your silence forces them to sit with their own noise. Without your reaction, their words feel different, less impactful, less satisfying. And over time, they start to lose interest in trying to trigger you, because the outcome is no longer rewarding. This does not mean you ignore everything. It means you choose when and how to respond. You take control of your timing. You remove the automatic response. And in doing so, you remove a major source of their influence. As this continues, your actions start speaking louder than any explanation ever could. You set boundaries without announcing them. No long conversations, no warnings, no repeated explanations. You simply stop tolerating what does not work for you. You stop engaging in certain discussions. You stop responding to certain behaviors. You stop giving time where it is not respected. And you do all of this quietly. No speech, just distance. At first, this can feel strange. There is a habit of explaining boundaries, of making sure the other person understands. But with toxic behavior, understanding is rarely the issue. The issue is respect, and respect is built through consistency, not explanation. When your actions change, the message becomes clear, not through words, but through repetition. You do not need to say what you will no longer accept. You show it. And over time, that message becomes stronger than anything you could say, because actions cannot be debated the same way words can. They cannot be twisted as easily. They simply exist. And that existence creates a new standard. At the same time, your emotional presence begins to shift. You become emotionally neutral, not cold, not disconnected, just steady. No visible triggers, no sudden anger, no visible excitement toward the same patterns that once affected you. This neutrality changes everything. Because emotional reactions are what fuel the cycle. When those reactions disappear, the cycle loses energy. They cannot play a game if you are not playing. And neutrality removes your participation without creating conflict. It creates a calm surface that does not give away much. And that calm surface becomes difficult to work with because it does not provide clear signals. It does not show what matters most to you. It does not reveal where to push. And without that information, control becomes harder. This does not mean you feel nothing. It means you choose what to show. You choose what to express, and you do not give that expression freely in every situation. Over time, this builds a strong internal balance. You feel less pulled by external behavior, less affected by sudden changes, more stable in your own space. Then comes a shift that changes the entire dynamic. You stop seeking their approval. This is where the real power shift happens, because approval creates dependence. When you need someone's validation, they have influence over your choices. They can give it or take it away. They can use it to guide your behavior. But when that need fades, their influence fades with it. You no longer look for signs of acceptance. You no longer adjust your behavior to fit their expectations. You make decisions based on your own clarity. And this independence is noticeable. The moment you stop needing them, they start noticing you, because the dynamic has changed. You are no longer trying to gain something from them. You are no longer adjusting to keep their approval. And that lack of need creates distance. Not physical distance, but emotional independence. And that independence is difficult to control because there is nothing to offer or take away that changes your direction. As your independence grows, your availability changes as well. You are not always reachable, not always present, not always ready to respond. You begin to control access to your time and energy. This is not about ignoring people. It is about valuing your availability. When you are always available, your presence becomes expected. When your availability becomes limited, it becomes valuable. Scarcity creates respect even from toxic people. Because when access is not guaranteed, it becomes something to consider, something to approach more carefully. You decide when to engage and when to step back. You decide how much time to give and when to keep it for yourself. And this control over your availability reduces the chances of being pulled into unnecessary situations. It creates space, and within that space, you regain clarity. With more space comes more observation. You observe more than you speak. You listen. You watch patterns. You notice details that were once hidden by constant conversation. When you speak less, you see more. You begin to understand behavior without needing explanations. You see consistency in actions, you notice repeated patterns, you understand intentions more clearly, and you do not reveal everything you see. You keep that awareness to yourself. People reveal themselves when you stop interrupting. When you stop filling every moment with words, they fill it instead. And in doing so, they show more than they realize. This awareness becomes a quiet advantage, not used for control, but for understanding. It helps you decide how to respond, when to engage, and when to step back. At the same time, you stop defending against false narratives. You stop chasing rumors. You stop trying to correct every misunderstanding. This is one of the hardest shifts because the instinct to defend yourself is strong. It feels necessary, it feels right. But constant defense keeps you in the same cycle. It gives attention to things that fade on their own. It keeps you connected to situations that do not deserve your energy. When you step back, when you allow time to reveal truth, the dynamic changes. Silence is uncomfortable, but powerful. Because it removes the immediate response that fuels the situation. It allows things to settle. It allows actions to speak over time. And most importantly, it protects your energy. Not every narrative needs your correction. Not every opinion needs your response. And understanding this creates a sense of freedom. As all these behaviors come together, consistency becomes your strongest tool. You stay consistent. No emotional highs and lows. No sudden changes in behavior, just steady, calm presence. This consistency removes unpredictability from your side, while removing predictability from theirs. They cannot push your buttons if the buttons are gone, because the usual triggers no longer work. The usual patterns no longer apply. And without those patterns, their influence weakens. Consistency builds trust in yourself. It builds stability. And it creates a clear standard that does not change based on every situation. And then comes the final shift. You walk away without drama. No final speech. No long explanation. No need for closure in the way it is usually expected. You simply step back, you remove yourself. Quietly, completely. And this quiet exit is often the most confusing part for toxic people. Because it gives them nothing to respond to, nothing to argue with, nothing to hold on to. Nothing confuses a toxic person more than a quiet goodbye. It removes the final chance to regain control. It closes the door without noise. And in that silence, the message becomes clear. Most people can't do even 3 of these consistently. Not because they are difficult to understand, but because they require discipline. They require patience. They require letting go of habits that feel natural. But if you master all 10, something changes, you become steady. You become controlled. You become difficult to manipulate, not because you are stronger in a loud way, but because you are consistent in a quiet way. And that consistency reshapes every interaction without needing to say a word. And in the end, the biggest shift was never loud, never dramatic, never something the world could easily point at. It was quiet. It happened in the way you started choosing your words more carefully, in the way you stopped reacting instantly, in the way you slowly pulled your energy back without announcing it. So no, you didn't become cold, you became controlled. You didn't lose people, you lost manipulation. And there is a difference most people don't understand until they feel it themselves. Because when manipulation disappears, what remains is clarity. You start seeing people for who they are, not who you hoped they would be. You start understanding patterns without needing explanations. You start valuing your peace more than temporary validation. Toxic people don't fear strength the way most people think. They don't fear loud voices or strong opinions. They adjust to that. They work around that. What they truly fear is losing access to you, losing access to your reactions, your attention, your emotional space. Because once that access is gone, their influence fades with it. And that is exactly what these silent behaviors do. They don't attack, they don't confront, they don't create chaos. They simply remove access. Slowly, quietly, and completely. At first, it may feel unfamiliar. There may be moments where silence feels heavy, where not reacting feels difficult, where walking away without explanation feels incomplete. But over time, that feeling changes. Silence becomes peace, distance becomes clarity, and control becomes natural. You stop feeling the need to fix everything. You stop feeling responsible for how others behave, and you start protecting something that most people give away too easily: your energy. This is not about changing who you are. It is about removing what was never meant to stay. The habits that kept you stuck, the reactions that drained you, the patterns that gave others control without you even noticing. And once those patterns break, something stronger takes their place. A quiet confidence, a steady presence, a sense of control that does not need to prove itself. If this felt personal, it's because you've experienced it in some way, maybe more than once, maybe for a long time. And that matters because it means you understand the weight of it. You understand how draining it can be, and more importantly, you understand why this shift is necessary. You're not alone in this. Many people go through the same patterns without ever realizing there is another way, a quieter way, a stronger way. Stay connected, because this is just the beginning of understanding how to move differently, how to protect your peace, and how to build a life that is not controlled by other people's behavior. If this gave you clarity, if even one part of this made you see things differently, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs peace, not pressure.